Gunko has come into direct conflict with the Column Pirates and has begun making a bunch of weird gestures towards Usopp as she single-handedly tore them apart one by one. St. Killingham has occupied the Walrus School, taking out Principal Kiba with very little effort, and after defeating Saul, St. Somers is gearing up to make a very important announcement. This chapter has single-handedly put the God Knights on a whole new level in my eyes. Seeing them wreak havoc on not only Saul and the other teachers at the Walrus School, but also the Straw Hats has worked wonders in making them feel like an actual threat, which, dude, they really needed. Because up until this chapter, I couldn't take these three seriously as the main antagonists of this arc. I mean, sure, they have cool and interesting abilities, and they're currently in the middle of using said cool abilities to try and overthrow Elbaf by kidnapping the kids on the island. Definitely evil, they check all of the boxes needed for bad guy status. But if we're being honest, the second Shamrock left the island, all the suspense around this group kinda went with him. Because out of the four, he was the only one that we actually saw as a real potential threat. And it's all because we look at who he's related to, and based solely on that, we put him on a pedestal of power that is damn near at the top for the series, despite seeing basically nothing from him to this point. Hell, we've seen more from his sword at this point in the arc than we have from him. It's also worth noting that one of said relatives that we compare him to, we also haven't seen anything from yet. His status as being one of the top tiers power-wise is based solely on his rank and his incredible ability to aura farm. I mean, just look at him. Even when sitting down, which is all we've seen Garland do up to this point, he still looks like someone that you don't want to mess with. Honestly, we might be basing the power of both of these leaders of the God Knights just off the fact that they're related to Shanks, and we have a rough idea of where he stands in the power rankings. And yet, despite that, even though we've seen 100 times more from these three than we have from Shamrock, I still couldn't see them as a serious threat without him. In fact, once Shamrock left, all the suspense shifted from the God Knights over to Loki, and ever since, we've been waiting to see if the shoe would drop on him being the real arc antagonist. Which is looking more and more like he's not with each chapter that goes by, though until we know for sure what happened with his dad, we can't really count him out. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this whole time Oda's been doing one big long play with Loki, making us go back and forth on whether or not he's actually as evil as everyone believes, then giving us major hints to doubt his guilt, getting us to the point where we are pretty certain he didn't kill his dad, only to flip things on us and have him turn heel at the very last second. Though, even if that was the plan, I'm not sure how much of a threat he'd realistically be right now, given how wounded he is. Luffy, Zoro, or Sanji could easily take him down in his current condition. Hell, I even think Haruden and his crew would stand a pretty decent chance. And then there's also still the small possibility of Elder Ja Rule secretly being a villain. Until we know the truth about King Carol's death, we can't completely count him out. And there's still that mysterious friend Loki was talking to a couple chapters ago. They could still be revealed to be a secret antagonist that is much more of a threat than anyone we've met yet. Though, I do think that one's a lot less likely. The point is though, that prior to this chapter, the idea of Gunko, Somers, and Killingham being the big bads of this arc really didn't excite me. And I think it comes down to that in my head, I had already written these three off as not being at the same level as the Monster Trio, and as such, they never really posed much of a threat. I mean sure, as opponents they might be a bit more than the rest of the crew could handle, with the obvious exception being Jinbei, or at least I thought that. And if there's anything that I have been excited about with these three, it was the idea of Gunko fighting Usopp. But every time I thought about Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji getting involved in this conflict, all the excitement kind of fizzled out because I really didn't see a way how those three could ever possibly end up losing. With the only exception being if Sanji somehow ended up fighting Gunko, that's the only one where it becomes a one-sided fight in the God Knight's favor. Other than that though, Luffy and Zoro beat any of the three God Knights in a 1v1, and same for Sanji if he fought either Somers or Killingham. Not saying that they'd be one-shots, even those three will struggle a bit dealing with the weird devil fruits that the God Knights have, but it'd still be over pretty quickly and ultimately would be kind of lackluster. Again, this is how I felt before this chapter. But after reading 1146, I might have to rethink exactly how I look at the God Knights. Because the amount of damage that they caused once they actually stepped into the fight is insane. Much more than I thought they caused in such a little amount of time, and they defeated people that, while not the strongest characters here, still are people I expected to put up much more of a fight than they actually did against them. Especially the Straw Hats. I never would have guessed that Gunko alone would have managed to solo this entire half of the crew, just off the fact that Jinbei is there, and it is widely debated if he deserves his number 3 spot or not. That being said though, just like I mentioned with Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, this was Jinbei's first time dealing with Gunko's ability. He doesn't know exactly how it works just yet, and he wasn't so much defeated as much as he was just knocked off the boat, so we do kinda have to give him a pass on this one. Especially since the rest of the crew ended up meeting the exact same fate, though we do have to give them all points for at least trying to put up a decent fight. And I do love the comedy that Oda interjected into this fight, with Gunko reversing Zeus back at Nami, making us think that he electrocuted her, only to reveal that it was Brook who ended up taking the hit. It was a perfect time for this kind of gag because the fight wasn't going to be a long one, just set up for a future encounter between Gunko and one or two members of this group. But getting back to my original point, I can now see why Oda chose these three to be our main antagonists for this arc. They're cool, they're cruel, and they do have a lot of potential. Not only as opponents for the weaker members of the crew, but also for the heavy hitters, who I now realize that Oda has separated them this entire time, not to deal with Loki, but to give the others time to learn the tips and tricks behind the God Knight's powers, so that they can lead Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji to victory. But before they step in to steal all of the credit, we do have to give some to Usopp, seeing as he was the only one to do any actual damage to Gunko during this initial battle, though I doubt he thought he'd end up doing that much. But him going completely nuclear on the top half of Gunko did lead us to a pretty big reveal that she has regenerative powers. Which now means we have a very important question to ask. Was her regeneration because we were wrong to assume that she had a Paramecia type devil fruit, when really she was a Logia? Or is this a sign of a much deeper connection between the seemingly young God Knight and Emu? Either way, this fight just became a bit harder for a majority of the Straw Hats, given that the only way to actually do damage to Logias involves the use of armored haki, something which, as far as we know, only Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbei have. And if her power is something closer to that of the Five Elders, well, we still haven't exactly found a way to get past that yet. Realistically, the former is a much more favorable situation for all the Straw Hats, but the latter might actually be the perfect setup for specifically Usopp. Because I stated a while ago in a previous video that I think once Oda has Usopp master his unique type of observation haki, that it would be how they managed to figure out the Gorosei's one and only weakness. And I've been saying since her introduction that I thought Gunko's arrows would be a great way to train Usopp's haki. So if she does have a power similar to that of the Five Elders, then we could be killing two birds with one stone. And I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that Usopp is definitely going to be at least one of the Straw Hats that ends up fighting Gunko, seeing as throughout their entire brief encounter in this chapter, her arrows kept pointing towards him for seemingly no reason. They weren't attack arrows or ones that were meant to misdirect like she used on the others, they just kept pointing at him. So I'm going to take that as Oda giving us a very clear hint of their matchup, which means we are at the very least getting a big showing of his haki later in this arc, also taking a step forward to making the biggest threats the crew has faced yet actually beatable. I also think that Nami's going to be involved since Gunko does manage to get away with Colin at the end here, and over the past few chapters, Nami and Colin have been building up a pretty quick friendship, plus, you know, he's a kid, so she'll definitely want to personally try and save him. Not to mention, her banter with the God Knight in this chapter did seem like it was kinda setting up a rivalry between the two. And it was actually during that exchange that we finally discovered the reason why the world government is so desperately trying to get the Island of Giants under their control. And it's all in preparation for the coming war that will lead to the end of the world, as it was said that whoever has the backing of the Giants will be the one to shape the war's outcome. Which, I mean, yeah, makes sense. Sure, the newer generation is mostly moving away from it, but this is still an island filled with warriors, so having them in your corner would help a great deal in pushing the odds of victory in your favor. Not that Gunko personally cares for that. She may be actively helping in overthrowing Elbaf, but she makes it pretty clear in the chapter that she doesn't care about the war. The only thing she cares about is that the world is destroyed and born anew. The only question is, who does she actually want making that new world? Because honestly, at this point, I can't tell. Gunko has been an enigma for the past few chapters. Whose side she's really on hasn't been easy to figure out. That's part of the reason why so many believe that she's secretly a spy for Dragon and the Revs. But honestly, I don't think she's really rooting for one side over the other. She just wants this current world to end and to see the new one regardless of who ends up winning. Because in her eyes, this world is already way beyond saving, so might as well hit the big red button, factory reset, and see how it develops from there. I don't really have a good transition from that point because I was originally planning on ending the video there, but I did want to address the Robin and Chopper situation because I have seen them taking a lot of heat online for not stepping in to help Saul. You know, ignoring the fact that he actively told them not to. And I'm pretty sure he did that for two reasons. One, I think deep down he still sees Robin as that little girl he saved back on Ohara and wants to try to protect her as much as he can, despite the fact that at this point, I'm pretty sure she's at least a bit stronger than he is. And two, they are the ones in the best position to help save the kids, and they can't do that if all three of them end up falling to Somers. So sitting by and waiting for him to leave really is the smart option, despite how hard it must be for her to sit back and watch Saul get hurt so badly. The good news is though, Somers should be walking away in between chapters to go meet up with Killingham back at the school because they plan on using the snow there to make a grand announcement to the entire island. Final thing I'll mention, Summers ends up adding a bit more to the lore surrounding the mystery behind King Carol's death. We now officially know that there was a connection between him and the world government, and that his death had a huge impact on their plans. But whether or not he was working with them to turn Elbaf into the government's personal island of mercenaries, or doing everything in his power to undermine their efforts, is still up in the air. So let me know in the comments down below, do you think King Carol was helping the world gov, or was it his efforts to stop them that ultimately led to his death?